Hi, Arthur. I'm here with my dear physics friend and colleague, Savannah Lodge Sharf, and we are going to be conducting our teacher interview. Creative, right? This is subliminal. So, Savannah, could you quickly just introduce yourself and tell me about how long you've been teaching, how you got into the field?
Yeah, I've been teaching. This is my fifth year in a regular classroom. Before that, I was doing education outreach at the Museum of Science. And before that, I was doing my student teaching, and I did a year of long-term subbing as well. All of that has been in physics. I am originally from Maine. My undergraduate is from Colby College in physics, and then I got my master's at the University of Maine, a master's of science in teaching with a concentration in physics and math. So,
You're kind of cool. So what classes do you teach at Madison?
I teach freshman physics. I teach I have my homeroom, which is just a freshman physics class, and then I teach a section of honors freshman physics. And then I teach engineering for juniors and AP physics for seniors.
Incredible. Time management skills are on point.
Off the charts.
So what is your basic teaching philosophy?
My basic teaching philosophy is centered around engagement and understanding student backgrounds that may have been different from mine. So whether that's a student of color growing up in a different area than I did, or in a more urban setting than the very rural one I grew up in, I can't truly engage students unless I understand where they're coming from and what their life is like outside of my classroom. And then making sure that I try and apply things that are going on in their lives to physics to make it more accessible and engaging.
That's awesome. What do you do in your classroom that really supports that?
I think one of the things is making sure that students have voice and choice. So that might be giving me feedback on how a lesson went and how it's working for their learning or not working for their learning. That may be involving a larger picture as we're either beginning or finishing a section or a unit that has to do with something that's going on in their lives or something that's going on in the news or something that relates to them in some way to make sure that they have access, like a personal access point to the things that we're going over.
Okay, so basically in a nutshell, would you say your philosophy is in order to engage the students, you need to make the material relevant to who they are as a person and the things that they're experiencing?
Absolutely. I would say that cultural relevancy in particular is something that's really engaging for students, making sure that, if I have students of color in my classroom, then I need to talk about things that they understand culturally. Because if I don't, then I'm giving them, I'm spoon feeding them something that they won't be able to relate to. And if they can't relate to that material, then they won't be able to access it.
Absolutely. And physics is one of the cool things that is directly related
to anything.
All the cool things that we do all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
We want you to use this.
Yes, absolutely.
So, what curriculum do you use?
I use Active Physics by Arthur Eisencraft.
Hey! You might be familiar with him. It's okay if you're not.
Maybe.
And so, how do you like it? What are your thoughts on it?
I really like it. I used a similar text in my student teaching that was by the same publisher called Project-Based Inquiry Science, which was for middle school. But it has the same sort of idea where you introduce something through something that's accessible, like a picture, and have students think about that and put out all of their misconceptions onto the page. And then you do some sort of activity that contradicts the misconceptions that you guessed they might have written down. Readdress that through a reading, a video, a lecture, some sort of spattering out of vocabulary and terms and equations, and then you make sure that they can apply that understanding through word problems and practice, and then, assess that understanding.
Right. So that sounds a lot like activity before content.
Yes. So the idea of activity before content or inquiry-based understanding or project-based learning, whatever buzzword we want to use today. But yes, activity before content allows students to explore something so that when you say the word force, they have a picture in their mind and a demonstration in their mind of what that word means before they even learn what the word is. So they immediately can picture it, instead of teaching them the word and then saying, see what just happened? This is that thing. Mm-hmm. They already have the picture in their mind.
Right. Wow. Actually, like, even the... that's how I felt in my brain, actually. I was like, even though that's what I do, I was like, wow, I really like the way you phrased that. So what's your, general grading policy?
So fortunately or unfortunately, depending on who you are and how you're looking at it, because I teach freshmen in the state of Massachusetts, my students will be taking a multiple choice standardized state test at the end of the year that will culminate all of their learning and understanding. So I like to have continuity for my students, and I like to set my students up for as much success as possible. And so I grade them based on the MCAS grading scale the entire year. So it is not foreign to them. They understand what it means. And so that is out of 4.
Okay.
4 being exemplary, meaning you can basically teach others what you've learned. Yeah. You know it so well that you can teach others. 3 being proficient, meaning you got it. You got everything you needed to get. You've successfully completed that standard. You've showed understanding of that standard. 2 is needs improvement, meaning you got probably 50-50, got some of the content, but you haven't shown me like all of your learning. And a 1 being warning, failure. We have a major misconception that's not being addressed. Okay. And a 0 being incomplete or undone.
Right. And so do you grade your formative assessments or your summative assessments this way as well?
Yes, I grade, all of my grading is based on a 4-point scale. Okay. There are extra credit assignments. The only exception to the 4-point scale is my attendance. Okay. One of the mission statements of Madison Park Technical Vocational High School is that half of everything is showing up. Yeah. And so I make that even more poignant in my class because a half of their grade is showing up. So if you're in class on time, 2 points a day. Okay. And so that adds up to 10. If they're tardy, it's only 1 point. If they're not there, it's 0 points.
Right.
So other than that, everything is based on the MCAS scale.
And what about homework?
That's a great question, Joellen. My philosophy is that I don't give homework. I ask of my students that they are present and that they are engaged from what I call bell to bell. So if they are in class, focused and ready to learn at the beginning of class when the bell rings, and continue that engagement and focus until the bell rings again, they do not have homework. Okay. Because they have given me everything that they can during that amount of time. They have given what I have asked. And as soon as they leave my classroom, I no longer have control over their environment. And in order to assure equity between all of my students, I know some of my students play sports. I know some of my students babysit. I know some of my students work. And some of my students go straight home and play video games. So, to ensure that regardless of what they do after school and what is being asked of them outside of school, to ensure equity throughout, I do not give mandatory assignments outside of my class time. That is obviously not true if you are taking an AP class. Okay. That is not at all. If you are taking an AP class, I am asking you to rise to the level of a university, and I am being asked to show you what it's like in college, and to give you that preparation. And in that term, I have them sign a contract stating exactly what I am expecting of them, because they chose to make that commitment. Right. My freshmen didn't choose to make this commitment. Every single freshman takes physics. Right. All of my freshmen take this class. Now, let's say you're a freshman that comes in when the bell rings and fools around the whole class and doesn't finish my worksheet. Well, now you have homework.
Okay.
Now I expect you, because you did not take your time seriously from bell to bell, you better be completing the assignments that you did not give me time for. If you do not give me my time, then you need to make up that time outside of my class.
Okay. So, just to play devil's advocate
Absolutely.
slightly, well, what about those people who don't take AP classes but are college bound? And if you're not giving them homework, are you then not preparing them for college life?
That's another great question. I think that there are opportunities for students to understand college rigor outside of the typical classroom. I don't teach upper level students who are not college bound.
Okay.
So I don't have kind of that around me. For my freshmen, because they are just starting high school, I want to focus on other things that will make them ready for high school.
Okay.
So that I would maybe consider, if I was teaching a non-AP class and that particular class happened to have students that were preparing for college, then I would absolutely consider giving outside of class time, and maybe even having a class discussion about, like, lots of us are college bound.
Mm-hmm.
Should we have homework in this class
Right.
to prepare us and to practice that? Because while a lot of students will get to college and kind of only do college, a lot of them will also go to college and have jobs.
Yeah.
Or have to take care of a child or parent or sibling or whatever, what have you.
Absolutely.
And so absolutely that is, time management skills are incredibly important. But we also have students who are going to have a 9-to-5 job.
Yeah.
And they leave their job and they don't have to do anything else.
Right.
And so I want to set up my classroom for kind of, I guess, if I were to set up my classroom where I had both college and career-bound people,
Mm-hmm.
I would maybe make it a choice.
Okay.
Where I would say, okay, are you college-bound? This is what I expect of you. Because
Okay.
this is what you're going to need to expect of yourself.
Right. Yeah.
And if you're career-bound and you're going to have a 9-to-5 next year, well, great.
Right.
Here's your 9-to-5. I will give you your 9-to-5. And maybe kind of hold people to what their own standards for themselves are.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. Like cater again, instead of having a cookie cutter method, you allow the student to dictate their path.
Yeah,
Which
and
is
that's that student voice and choice,
Right.
like making sure that the students are in charge of their own learning. Because if you have a student who you say, hey, you want to go to college, right? And they're like, yeah. Okay, great. Well, you're going to need to do this in college. Why don't
Right.
you practice this now?
Absolutely.
That student is then 100 times more likely to complete that assignment than a student who you say you have homework every night, do it.
Right. Additionally, I think knowing who you are as a person, I believe that the homework you would give would be like meaningful instead of monotonous.
Yes. I'm a huge believer in a flipped classroom as well. That's how I operate my AP classroom. So there is a way to do homework well and sustainably and in a way where students are actually learning. I think one of the things that I really struggled with when I had homework in high school was if I got stuck.
Yeah.
So if you get stuck on a problem without any aid around you, what do you do? Like you're just
Right.
stuck. And then having okay, we're stuck on this problem. Well, especially in math or physics, if you're stuck on this problem, you're going to be stuck on everything else too. Like
Good luck to you.
It's all about the same stuff. So just making sure that when you flip your classroom, it's instruction that happens outside
Yeah.
and it's practice that happens inside where the support resides, where I reside as your instructor. I am your support. Your colleagues, your peers are your
Yeah.
support, and they're able to help you through getting stuck. And so I really like things like Edpuzzle for that. I like YouTube videos. I like Khan Academy. I like things, especially videos. Videos are so helpful for all learners. For students with IEPs, they can slow it down. They can watch it again. They can access it in any way that they want. For my ELL students, they can have it translated. They can use subtitles. They can pause. They can write. They can look up a word when they get stuck. So having that videos have been really helpful, especially for my AP students. They love them. They love the opportunity to watch it again if they get stuck. And so then there's apps like Edpuzzle that allow you to also ask questions as they go along, so that I can come into class. And now I've used this also as a formative assessment. Right. So now I come into class and I know, question 3 was really hard, so we need to go over that. And then I can make that my do now, and now I've informed my practice. Right. So if homework is given, I think that it needs to be given with purpose. And I very much am a fan, as is the research, of course, on flipped classroom.
Speaking of getting stuck, so sometimes we as teachers also need support. What is your teacher support here at Madison?
My teacher support is you. No, but just in general, my first go-to is always my colleagues. If I'm stuck, because they're a wealth of knowledge, especially, we have teachers in this building who've been doing this for 25 years. I mean, as a young teacher, that is always my first place that I can go. My second place that I go is some sort of teacher guide, online teacher resource, something where I can see, has another teacher experienced this and gotten through it? So that's number 2. And then the third is really kind of digging into the research. And that would be a last resort. I can't figure this out. There's barely anything that has gotten to that point, because usually my colleagues are helpful enough that they can help me solve the problem, and then we're all set. Right. But if it gets to that, I would dig into the research. I would go back. I have a lot of great people that I met and am still in contact with from my graduate program that are able to kind of help me through things like that. Former professors and stuff like that. That would be my last resort. Okay. And so how do you use information and just your knowledge as a five-year veteran teacher to make your curriculums and lesson plans? So in the Boston Public Schools, our curriculum is already written for us. Okay. We have so at the state level, there are standards we need to cover, and an assessment this is for freshman physics. There's a state standards that we need to cover. And then at the district level, those standards have been ordered in a scope and sequence. And then from there, we, as a district, picked a curriculum, which is active physics. And then they got a bunch of teachers together. I happen to be one of them. And we ordered the curriculum based on the scope and sequence of our standards. Okay. So we really did it very methodically. And that has been incredibly helpful this year. Because it came from such a wealth of teacher knowledge and understanding, and people who've taught active physics for many, many years, people who know these standards, people with backgrounds in physics and with backgrounds in education coming together to kind of figure out what's our best idea. And that has definitely shown this year, I think, in comparison to last year when we did not have that order, and we're kind of being like, we could do it in this order. It was a little more wishy-washy, and so this year has been much more standardized, and I think it's really helped the kids with their understanding as well. Yeah, I was also happy to be at that first portion, and what they said as well about students transferring, I think is really important, because if we're all going in the same order, no matter what school you're at, then you lessen the amount of you missed this or you're doing this over, the redundancy. So absolutely. Thanks for taking part in that. Of course. Let's see. So you said you teach an AP class. Yeah. What is your male to female ratio in that class? So I have 12 students in my AP class. This is the first year we're running it. It was very exciting. Pioneering. Let's go. And I have 3 girls. Okay. So I have 3 girls to my 9 boys. Okay. So less than 30%. More than 30%. 33.3%. Sorry. Yes. Math on the fly is not my strength. Yes. So, yeah, about 33%.
So is that similar to your experience as a woman in physics? Or is it getting better? Is it the same?
It is, it is, in this particular class, it is not getting better.
Okay.
When I was in undergrad, our percentage was about 30%.
Okay.
And from what I am seeing in terms of physics instruction and teachers that I know, it is less than 30%. 30% is like a, woohoo, we did it. So, I am very pleased to have 3 girls.
Yeah.
I think that my goal will be, because I teach freshmen, to encourage more of our girls to pursue science and the hard trades. I think at a trade school, that's another thing is a lot of our girls go into trades that are more stereotypically and more, it's not even a stereotype, it's just true, dominated by females.
Yeah.
Because that's where they feel most comfortable, because they feel like they fit in.
Yeah.
And so to also just encourage any of my girls who might be interested to pursue the hard trades, because those are the trades that if they don't feel like they want to go into the trade union, those are the students that are going to have access to engineering and the hard sciences, and then pursue that perhaps at a university.
So, like, what's the problem? Because here we are, several years later, and we're still at the same percentage. What are we not doing? What are we missing, in your opinion?
So I would say, like, in my experience, the makeup of the 12, ironically, so I have 12 students in my AP class, and there were 12 of us in my major at Colby College, at my little liberal arts school in Maine. And there were 3 girls. So it was identical. Like,
right.
It was the same makeup, which is very ironic and obviously a coincidence. I'm not saying that is data that we should be looking at, but it is interesting. And when I was in school, I was incredibly lucky to have, from 6th through 12th grade, only one of my math teachers was a man.
Wow.
I had, so
that's impressive.
In 7 years, I had 6 female math teachers. And that's why I went to school. I originally went to school for math.
Okay.
And so I think that's the first thing, is to remind our young girls that they can do math.
Okay.
And that math is for girls. And that boys and girls are just as equally as good at math. That has to do, the reason they don't feel as good at math, or the reason that stereotype exists, is not because it's true. It's because of outside factors, like what toys they play with as little kids and what they're asked to do by society. But if you have a student, who has that gift and who has shown other women in their life who are good at math, and that becomes the norm, then I would bet that you would see a more 50-50 split. Absolutely. In terms of math and math-heavy sciences, right. It's very clear why so many women go into biology is because, and the research says this, there are tons of papers published about this topic, but when women are told they aren't good at math, they still want to access science. Yeah. Well, what's the least mathy science? Biology. So that's how so many women end up in biology. I was so lucky to be told by my role models that math was for girls, math was for women. And so I ended up in physics kind of through a back door through math, which is...
Physics is useful!
Because physics is cool math. And then ironically, I had a terrible male math professor, and that is why I switched to a physics major. So I think that's level 1. Level 1 is remind girls that they are good at math, and that boys are not better at math.
Right.
You are just as good at math, and math is for both girls and boys. The next stage is to remind people of color that math is for them as well. I will say anecdotally that coming from a school with 99.9% white students to a school of 99.9% students of color, the conceptual understanding is much higher at Madison than at schools that I've taught at that were predominantly white.
Interesting.
The math skills are lower, and that is very clearly due to previous education.
Yeah.
It is not an ability thing. Okay. But it's well documented that there are, lower standards for schools in urban settings, especially urban settings with predominantly students of color, than there are in the burbs with all the white kids in their elementary schools.
Yep.
So that's the next step would be to raise the rigor and the expectation of not only the teachers, but the administrators of the district to make sure that math that they're coming in with, and there's a lot of factors that impact this as well. It's going to take a boost in our community centers as well, making sure that the pre-kindergarten education for our urban youth is the same as for our suburban youth. Making sure that they have access to those educational toys.
Absolutely.
Making sure that they have access to computers, to logic, to coding, to engineering design practices, to museums, to everything, to make sure that's equitable. And as soon as we have equity, or even close to equity, across gender and across race, we will have equity in our AP Physics classes. So it's a bottom-up practice. But I guess the real question is, what can we do tomorrow, right? So when you talk about it like that, it makes you feel very helpless.
Yeah.
But I think in general, bringing in more female students and more female students is going to happen if we bring in more female teachers.
Okay.
We need to bring in more female teachers in math. We need to bring in more female teachers in physics, and on top of that, more teachers of color. And the more these students can see themselves in some way in a teacher that they have, it only takes one.
Yeah.
It takes one teacher saying, "You're good at math. You should take AP Physics." That's all it takes. So if you're not a woman and you're not a person of color, so you're a white man who is teaching physics, which is very common because all the physics teachers I ever had were white men.
Me too.
If you are a white man, all you have to do is just say to a girl or say to a student of color that you have, "I think you're good at math. You should take AP Physics," because it takes one teacher.
Right.
Just takes one teacher telling them that.
Absolutely.
To get them motivated and make sure that we increase those ratios.
So I know you personally, so I know that you spend a lot of time on your curriculum and lesson plan development. So can you walk me through your steps of how you try to plan your lessons and how you work to integrate all of your beliefs and values into your curriculum as a whole?
Planning and experience.
Okay.
So the first year I taught, there was no cultural relevancy going on in anything that I did, because it was my first year teaching. So I was just trying to keep my head above water. So after 5 years of establishing my curriculum and figuring everything out, I now have the luxury of being able to go back and look at where I can bring in cultural relevancy. And I'm very lucky to have, you and many other of my mentors and peers and colleagues that are working towards cultural relevancy and cultural integration. And so I have so many resources that I can go to and so many people that I can collaborate with that I've been trying to focus on, okay, well, first of all, let's just find cultural relevancy for the chapter challenges. Let's just think of that big overarching thing and let's make that relevant. and focusing on that.
Yep.
And all of this is done over the summer. This is not like a fly by the seat of my pants kind of thing. And then for the little things, it's more like name dropping, making sure that my classroom is culturally relevant, making sure that my classroom has pictures of people of color, making sure that I talk about scientists of color, making sure that I talk about women physicists, making sure that that we bring them up. And then the rest is led by the students, and making sure to not shut down students who have questions about these things that are sticking out. And so when I go to plan a lesson, it's really more about how am I going, because the planning's already done.
Yeah.
The planning was done in the summer. So it's more, when I looked at what I'm going to do tomorrow, the lesson planning is really, what did I do yesterday? What formative assessment did I give? How did it go? And how am I going to adjust my practice for tomorrow based on what was planned previously? Because we have an incredible curriculum and because we are following it with fidelity, we have the luxury of knowing what's next. That is not true for everyone, and I know that. But because of that, we're able to really adjust our practice based on formative assessments and go from there. And
so last question, for a new teacher that will be teaching science, what advice specifically do you have for them about how to be an effective teacher in a science classroom?
I would say it doesn't matter what subject you're teaching. You have to create a classroom climate first. The first thing you need to do is absolutely make sure that your environment is conducive for the students that are in it. No learning will happen until that happens. I think it took me 5 years to figure that out. But you can't push learning until your climate and your environment are conducive for the students. And so that's number one. But number two is love science. All you have to do to be an incredible science educator is love science and show your kids that. If you love science and you show your kids and you have an environment where your kids can learn, you're all set.
Well, thanks for watching. Bye.